I was born in Oradea, in Hungarian Nagyvárad. This is a city in Transylvania on the border between Hungary and Romania.
And what are the names of the people in your family?
My father was Nicolaus Krantzthor. My mother was Alice Stern, married Krantzthor, and my brother was Gabriel Krantzthor.
And what is your birth date?
My birth date is March 26, 1924.
And you brought some pictures today to show us of your family that you have?
Well, the only family picture I have is a group picture from 1927, which happened to be taken in the Adriatic Sea in Italy, in Grado. This is my mother, my father, my brother, and the little one, that's myself.
Okay.
The only picture that I could find after deportation and an immigration of the whole family.
And do you have another picture of your mother?
Oh, hard to become. That is my mother's picture at the year of deportation, which she survived with me together. The two of us were the only survivors out of 72 people.
And your father's photograph?
I don't have a photograph of my father. I have a picture of my brother, which was his last picture taken. He was killed in 1944 in compulsory work camp by the Hungarians, or we think by the Hungarians or the Ukrainians. He might have been gone to the partisans, according to some people. We're not sure. Or we were told that he was tortured to death. We were no way home.
Tell us a little bit about what your home life was like before the war.
Well, before the war, we lived in a Hungarian culture since 1848. The Hungarian Jews have been very emancipated and very assimilated, and we were some of those very comfortable, middle class Hungarian Jewish life, partially imitating the Hungarian gentries and partially striving very hard to getting into the, to trying and succeeding to getting into the cultural and political life of the local organization of human beings.
What did your father do?
My father was an industrialist in lumber.
And your mother?
My mother happened to have a teaching diploma which she never used. Well, before the war, what we heard was free, Radio Free Europe, and we heard some horrible possibilities of Jewish people being deported, which we did not know details of at all. It was some kind of nightmare. But as usually, people think that it can happen to someone else. And we went out to the train stations and saw people being carried and took packages and so on. But we didn't quite know where they come and where they go, and we didn't quite believe it that it will happen to us one day. In 1940, the Axis powers did annex our part of Transylvania from Romania back to Hungary. At that point, the so-called Jewish laws started being instituted, but very softly and slowly. And the young men, like my present husband and my late brother, were taken to compulsory work camps. The Germans did take over power, Hungary. And this is when very fast our life has changed. From one day to the other, we had to wear the very well-known yellow star. We could not get out from our homes. Only at certain times of the day we could not enter public places. Our bank accounts and businesses and whatever meant some kind of power was closed. Our telephones were left. We could not employ anyone anymore. There was daily more and more cutting off of the Jewish people until one day the ghetto started being instituted in our town around a beer factory. I happened to study in a French Catholic nun school, which was Notre Dame de Sion de Paris, which was not unusual at all for Jewish girls, because almost half of the population of this very elite school were Jewish girls. It was excellent teaching, but there was no converting. It was a very good experience until the point when the French nuns had to leave. Then the Jewish lycée, which was built by our parents and kept by the Jewish community, was an excellent educational standard, and was until then only for boys, did accept us girls also. So we could continue our education. This is how I finished my last year of high school. As far social happenings go, most amazingly, from one day to the other, those Gentile young people with whom we were close friends did not know us anymore. Interestingly, this morning a picture came to my mind. My brother was taken on a train to compulsory work, and my family, as we escorted him to the train station. And that train was stationed on the second rows of tracks. In the front row of the tracks came in another train, and in that train I, with gladness, discovered one of his very good friends with whom he rode horses, and waved to him. And then I realized that he is in a military train wearing a lieutenant's outfit. And when he saw me, and then he saw my brother standing next to me, he turned 90 degrees sharply and didn't know us anymore. When the trains left, one left north and one left south, and both young men looked out the windows, my brother and his friend. Neither one returned anymore. Mm-hmm. This was what people experience on a small scale between each other, and this is what people experience towards life, full death, and whichever side it happened. My father had owned large forests in Romania. We were on the border, and every morning one of his employees, called Mr. Director Fofiu, gave him reports about the factories and whatever was there. And one day my father told him that we intend to escape through the forests to Romania. And that Mr. Fofiu said, Mr. Krantzthor, you just start your action and the guard will be there for you. Meaning that we had to stay, we had no way of escaping.
Mm-hmm. Was this an employee of your father
Yes.
who told him that? Was he saying it in a threatening way or in a way
Well, the guard was the Iron Guard, the killers of Romania, although the Romanians have not been given out their Jews as the Hungarians have. So many people fled to Romania because there was no threat of deportation there. It was done in a much more humanistic way, even there was great discrimination and certain atrocities happened, but there was no general extirpation of the race. My brother was in compulsory work camp. We were taken to the ghetto. Before going to the ghetto, he called us on the telephone and he said goodbye, and
When was
We
he?
cried.
When was he taken? How old was he?
He was 19, 20. He died at 21. So we separated on the telephone, goodbye, and from days then a regular planning has been carried through the city, where trucks came packed up with a few belonging to Jewish families and took us to the ghetto. And of course the home as it was remained intact. It happened that the German commander of the local airfield moved into our house. We saw him come in when we left. He bought our piano first. He came under the pretext of looking around that he said he wants to buy a piano. But he moved in. And then we would have had an opportunity still, because it was planned to escape, but that would have been quite in our law-abiding style somehow. So we just let us like muttons taken. The ghetto was an agglomeration that was about for 4 or 5 months, or maybe just 3, 4 months, I'm not quite sure. But there were horrible happenings there. The Jews were taken every day. Some Jews were taken to the factory. In the factory they were tortured with electrical modes, and there were all kinds of other ways of getting out their last hidden goods and golds and diamonds and if they're dollars or whatever. My uncle, who was my ideal human being, a very humanistic and beautiful person, inside out, beautiful human being, he was taken from us for a day. They took him early in the morning. They brought him back from the factory, from the beating factories at night. Instead of feet and legs, he had some amorphous big black, two big black swollen, like balloons. And then soon after that, we were placed in the cattle trains, and I don't think he could walk anymore. My husband's brother, who was the court physician of the ghetto, was tortured with electric wires, and they tortured him until he has spoken about the goods of other friends that he has hidden. So according to the moral and ethical code to our times and place, he had to kill himself. He was taken back to his family, and he gave himself morphine injection and he died. Human beings have an incredible capacity of defending the integrity of the psyche, as you know. So we talked to each other, and we played games, and we walked around, and we socialized, and we talked about days when this would be probably over, and how shall we to help the world that this wouldn't happen again, and things like that. From early spring until, I think, beginning of June. And then the trains which came, it was set so that a wide area of rain tracks would be closed, because we didn't know, but the ghettos were supposed to be the interim situation between local and the concentration camps. So we were put in the cattle trains too, and for 3 days and 3 nights, very jam-packed. We traveled in the cattle trains. We couldn't practically move around. We still had a little remainder of food and some rotten water, and the physiology of human being came closer and closer to our everyday living. We could not lay down, only sit and kind of stoop. There was not enough time to extend members. And one night I thought I was very bright, because I found a place to lay down, and I extended my legs and my arms, and then I was stepped on the head in the dark. No one knew where to step. They stepped on my head accidentally. So I never tried comfort again in those 3 nights and days until we arrived one morning to Auschwitz. Of course, we didn't know where we are at.
Where did they tell you you were going? Or where
no one talked to us. Who talked to us to there? No one said anything. The doors in a very early morning, it was very cold, and although it was summer, but it was just time of dawn, and the doors were ripped open, and they were screaming, "Los, los, los!" And we had to disembark from the cattle train, which we did. And before we did that, actually, my father looked out under little holes, little bars, and he said he was a humanist and an optimist and an eternal comforter. He always comforted everyone, so did my mother. And he said, "It will be good again, because I see people. People go to work. I see some leaders here, and people are marching. We can stay alive if we work." And then when we came closer, then we saw what everybody knew what it was like. My mother looked upon it mangerly, like this, and then she just straightened out herself and she marched like a very young woman. She was young. She was only 42, 43, which is young then, but for that situation, not. And he looked at her twice. And she mangerly asked her, "What is your name?" And she told her name, and she pulled out. And he said, "Go this way, to the right with me." And this was how she stayed alive. And that's when our Auschwitz history started.
And your father?
My father went also to the right. He lived to the very last moment. He was in Auschwitz. I don't know where else he was. He wrote us a letter one day, which came through the barbed wires, and said in the letter, "Eat everything, try to work, and keep up your chin, we'll meet again." We did not. He lived until the very last minute. He took very good care of himself and others, from what I understand. When the Americans approached, he did enter a political prisoner lager, and they were all exterminated in Buchenwald in the woods. He was exterminated in his woods that he loved. He loved the forests, but that's where he died. And my uncles, I had other family, of course, grandmother and uncles and children, 72 people. They all were. So they all went to Auschwitz, and we don't know what happened to them. We just know that no one came back. The only thing I know is about my father and a little bit about my brother vaguely.
And what was daily life like for you?
In Auschwitz?
Yes.
Well, we were in Lager C, which means the bunkers. Those were originally constructed for stallions, for horses. Then they have put on flat wood in which women, well, this is written in every book, women did lay close like in a spoon position, 14. We did not have in the beginning any covers either, and we were wearing rags, and our hair was cut. And when one turned, then everyone else had to turn so that one can do that. And it was cold, and the first weeks we had for food, they were not prepared for this large amount of influx, so they gave us water with sandy grass. And we had to eat that if we wanted to stay alive, because there was nothing else, neither food nor water. Later it became much better. We had that I don't know what carrot, that white carrot soup is called, the carrot that they give to the cows. That was fantastically good food. And then, of course, later we've gotten the small breads. Piece of bread every day and some coffee. And then the selection, there was Zählappell every day. You know the stories when people lined up, and then people were separated and people who were sick were taken to crematoriums. I found out about the crematorium very early because I spoke many languages. And I happened to correspond in French through the barbed wires with a certain Dr. Pash, who I just found lately in some books because I just started reading lately. And Dr. Pash wrote down everything that's happening. He was the doctor of the big crematorium in Lager B. So I knew what's happening and what the smoke comes from, but never told anybody until people found out. Women did find out from the men who came into work, and communication started. My mother has been very ill. She was in the beginning the one who kept alive with great optimism and encouragement many kids, and she was the mother of many children who didn't have mother. And then she gave one day some coffee with sweetener, which Dr. Pasha's helper threw to the barbed wires. She had sweetener in her coffee, and there was a girl with typhoid fever, and she knew that, but she still gave it from her dish, so she called it typhoid fever. And also had scarlet fever, which she lives through. She didn't want us to be selected for work because she said that one needs to allow fate to be wiser. And we did not push ourselves to be selected for work. We waited until we were. By that time, my mother was very ill. And one day we were selected and we knew we were going to work. But it happened that instead of being taken to work, we were taken to the crematorium gates. As we found out after, the place of work where we were supposed to be taken has been bombarded by the English planes. Therefore, there was no place for us, so we were sent to the Vernichtungsplace, annihilation place. We were for 2 days laying in front there in the very heated August. That was August by the time, August sun. And then a new order came. We were still not killed for some reason. A new order came that we be embarked in the same cattle trains, and they took us for life. They took us 20 miles south of Hanover to Fallersleben, KDF Staatswagen. From what I understand, it is where they make the Volkswagens. And we substituted Polish girls who made water mines. And in 2 or 3 weeks, we made 5 times the amount of water mines that the Polish girls did. And then we started making the V to the V2, the first missiles, the miracle weapons. That's what we did. And we lived in wonderful accommodations in the washrooms, in the shower rooms of the workers, which was half bombarded and half by that time. They have placed beds with hay for us, which was which was incredible comfort for us. And everyone had a cover and so on.
When you say they, who is they? Who are they?
Well, we had SS women taking care of us, and a few old Wehrmacht soldiers with their guns. The SS women took care of us and escorted us across the road to the factory. These were the washrooms where we were. Well, when we came to Auschwitz, this was the time when day by day, this was the time of the biggest entrance ever into Auschwitz. It was rush, because already we were towards the end of the war. And, it was towards the end of the war. And the influx into Auschwitz was so immensely big that the crematorium were not functional enough. They have dug, as you will know from the history, they have dug immense other places of extermination and repatriation. But that was purely Hungarian. Next to us was a Czech lager. The Czechs were there for a long time, Jews and Aryans also. They looked like some walking cadavers already. And one day there was a very strict Blocksperre when they have evacuated the Czech, I think it was Lager's 13 or whatever, from where evacuating the Czechs, they have put the new arrivals. And I never forget that horrible thing, because I looked out and I saw the dead being thrown, I mean corpses, but more just bones, being thrown on carts. The carts were pulled by the striped, dressed Häftlinge, and the cadavers were piled up high. And I never forget the dance. I was a dancer when I was young, and those cadavers danced. And I always wanted to do a dance macabre, but never could. It was too much. But those were the Czechs. In Auschwitz, very little. At one time, a newspaper made its way when there was a trial to assassinate Hitler. That we knew of. The news made itself through. Well, there were people there who went out to work, not from our lines, but the older ones who have been already established there. Well, we looked like we couldn't even communicate with people. We were mostly barefooted or with some wooden shoes, and we had no hair, and we had some rags. And when we first saw our own kins before we entered, we were outside of the barbed wire. We thought that we were passing in some mental institution from the looks and the behaviors, and in no time we were inside the barbed wires looking exactly the same. I remember I looked at my mother and started laughing when they cut her hair and she was naked, because she looked exactly like my grandfather, who didn't have hair. We had always some good laughs, even if the biggest misery. Maybe that's why we were alive. No, we did not have any news. In Fallersleben, we had more news because there was a possibility to talk to German workers, which we also spoke German, of course, and then there was this French artist who kept us. He even drove constant, beautiful maps where the Allied forces were, risking his own life and bringing us food, extra food all the time. And then, of course, the best time of our lives were the ones when there were air attacks on Fallersleben, and we were taken down to the bunkers, and we thought that maybe one day they're going to bomb out the shelters and we shall be free. Even if on the price of our life, it would have been wonderful to get free. When the American army actually the 84th Division, as we found out later, approached, then the command came for extermination. The SS women were supposed to embark us in a train, take us to the next forest and shoot us. But this didn't happen. Now, I don't want to exaggerate, it sounds like, but it was mainly due to my mother, because she just decided that this is not going to happen. And we went to the SS women and told them, you save us, we save you. And so they put us on those trains, but didn't shoot us in the forest, but deposited us at Salzwedel, which was not very far, and other DP came to be, and left us there, and they ran, and we have let them. We knew that the army was there. We let them run, and they let us stay.
What was the relationship with some of these SS women?
Well, they were cruel. They awoke us with some whips. It was a typical morning to get up, whipping and cursing out, and food was wonderful after Auschwitz. It consisted of a thick soup of vegetable in a bowl, and a piece of bread, and once a week there was, Sunday, there was a little potato in the soup, and if you fished real well, you found meat, little pieces of meat. And there was soap, maybe of human origin, some suggest, we don't know. Well, we knew because that's why, see, this French man told us everything, otherwise we wouldn't have known. And probably there were other people who made connections and started getting news from outside. But personally, this is how Mother and I knew what is going on.
So then what happened?
Well, then we were deposited in this camp, and the people who were in that situation worked in a sugar factory. And the sugar factory was populated with these DPs, Jewish women, and there were POWs, French war prisoners. And they were extremely well organized. We owe our lives, in addition to Americans, to the French war prisoners, because of course the American army wasn't there to take care of this crowd of, this was such a surprise, and we looked so inhuman and distorted, and many of us were very, very ill. They didn't know what to do with us. It was just completely beyond understanding. Of course, they were there to fight. The French prisoners were very well acquainted with the local situation. Number one, the mayor of the town, excuse me, I must place this back from my eyes. The mayor of the town wanted to annihilate the camp because, as you well know, the motto was "do not leave traces behind" of what has happened. So we just saw an airplane, very, very low, flying above the camp several times, but nothing happened. As we found out later, the prisoners went to the mayor's office and said, if we're aware that you want to bombard that camp, if you do bombard this camp, we exterminate your family. By the time, they were in the possession of his family. So the plane lifted, but was radioed not to throw the bomb. As soon as the gates of the camp opened, the French man immediately took over organization. The women spread throughout the city, small city, and went in the stores just very peacefully and asked for what they want. Some didn't ask, some took. But in no time, they were dressed like human beings instead of rags and barefooted and being grotesque figures of incredible ridicule and tragic appearance. So partially that's what happened. And the French brought food and organized. They've gotten trucks, and life started. After the battles were over in the environment, and the cannons and shoots were not being heard anymore, then the Americans reappeared and took a look of what happened. And I happened to be one of the translators, because one of the big problems was the many languages that people spoke and couldn't communicate. And in no time, the American army found an incredibly beautiful place for us and transported us on trucks over to a Luftwaffe pilot preparing army ground. That was just the most beautiful resort in this world. And we had regular barracks with regular shower and regular kitchen, regular food, and walks and plants and trees and bushes, and movie theater and a theater. And I happened to organize a theater from the DPWs very fast. Within 2 days, the theater was ready, and we did to give performances to the wounded soldiers who were placed. Hospitals were immediately, there were horrible battles around there. Battle of the Bulge was not too far, not too long ago from there. And those beautiful mansions were turned into hospitals, and that's where we had our performers, or for the local soldiers, evenings we did perform. It was very easy to find talent, and there were 10,000 deported people there. And I've been hired by the Army in Special Service. And this is how my big love affair started with the 84th Division Rail Splitters. I worked for them in 1945, and today I'm a life member of the Rail Splitters, and so was my mother.